I'm going to read the opening paragraphs, about 10 to 12 paragraphs, from a novel called The Mammaries of the Welfare State by Upmanya Chatterjee. This book was launched in 2001, I think, by Upmanya Chatterjee as a sequel to a much more successful prequel called English August. It tracks the current life of the protagonist of English August, this IAS officer called Agatha Sen. And the reason I want to read the first few paragraphs of this book is to give you guys an understanding of how word choices and how you structure your story and how the names you choose for things can convey and build a world much, much more richer than the simple language that we're accustomed to using. So here I'm going to start. It's going to take about 5 to 7 minutes just to finish the first 10 to 12 paragraphs, after which we'll discuss the choices that Upamani Chatterjee made, which made his character so vivid in the first few paragraphs. So here we go. Agastya was so enervated by his life in the city that ever so often, when he was alone, he found himself leaning back in his desk chair or resting his head against the armrest of the lumpy sofa in his office that served as his bed, shutting his eyes and weeping silently. The cry generally made him feel better. His office was his home. So hard-working a civil servant was he. Just a week ago, he had been placidly content in his position of a joint commissioner, rehabilitation, on leave not granted and without pay, snugly afloat on the unplumbed murk of the Prajapati Aflatun Welfare State Public Servants Housing Complex Transit Hostel in the country's capital. As an illegal occupant of flat A214, he had felt in those days cocooned and distanced from the swirl around him. Marathon power cuts in summer, a cleanish municipal swimming pool a minute's cycle ride away. Great dope, no sex though. All in all, his life on leave had been okay minus. Then, out of the blue, personnel always moved like lightning when it wanted to fuck somebody's happiness. He'd received his transfer orders to this 15 by 15 boarded up section of veranda on the 14th floor of the new secretariat in the Western Province's capital city. The grimy, once orange lumpy sofa was for VVV to the par infinity IP visitors. His predecessor had won it from protocol and stores after a stimulating 5-week struggle. Beneath the windows lay the plain wooden bench that Agastya had stolen from down the corridor. It was his kitchenette. On it stood his kettle, cafetiere, electric stove, and tea things. Beside the door, on a desk, sat a personal computer swathed in dusty dust sheets. The Ultimatum System Configuration Module 133 MHz, Intel Processor 8 MB RAM, 1 GB HDD, 1.44 FDD SVGA, Megachrome Monitor Skylight 99 was entitled to air conditioning, so it had to remain. The windows of his section of veranda offered a breathtaking view of the world's largest slum, undulating for miles down to the grey fuzziness of the Arabian Sea. Agastya spent 3 or 4 nights a week at Daya's, a 45-year-old divorcee whom he had met on the luxury coach that he had caught out of the transit hostel on the occasion of his transfer. They found themselves sitting side by side on the rear of the hot and crowded bus. Luxury simply meant that its tickets cost more. Daya was bespectacled and had been dressed in a whitish salwar kameez. Agastya had been in his valedictory present from the staff of his rehabilitation office, his new blue jeans. After 8 years in the civil service, he had come to dread farewell gifts chosen by subordinate office employees. After the tearful speech-making, they'd routinely, on each occasion, given him a clock. So that even though time flies, you'll remember us, they'd explained when they felt that he hadn't looked grateful enough. At the rehabilitation commissionariat, therefore, he'd summoned the office superintendent and asked, "Do you plan to collect some money for a farewell present for me? Yes? How much will it be? If you don't mind, I'll accompany whoever is going to buy the thing." The long last seat of the bus had been intended for 6 bums. 8 had been a disgraceful crush. Agastya's right thigh had virtually fused with Daya's left. Thus, the ice had been broken. The heat had helped too. She had taken off her glasses rather early in the relationship. She had large, tired eyes and a wide mouth. Agastya had immediately yearned to go to sleep with his face restful between her ample, firm breasts. Only repressed homos, his soul had pointed out to him then, longed to fuck women old enough to be their mothers, especially when their own mothers are dead. Ah, well, que sera sera. She'd wanted her sunglasses and some tissues from her travelling bag, and he had got up to take it down from the overhead rack when he had noticed an uneven dark blue strip running down the outside of the thigh of her whitish salwar, like a ribbon down a bandmaster's trouser leg. His new blue jeans had been shedding colour, like a snake its skin. Destined to fade, ran their ad. They were called F-ups. He died of embarrassment for 4 seconds, then had plonked down with her bag on his lap, determined not to get up until journey's end, or till she lay down on the floor of the bus, wriggled out of her kurta, peeled off her salwar, sighed and begged him to gnaw off her panties with his teeth, whichever was earlier. Hadn't she noticed how he touched her up? Ah, her spectacles were off. Oh, the blessings of imperfect sight. Where in the city will you be staying? Oh, at the Raj Atithi State Guest House. Daya had looked blank, reminding him that the world of the city encompassed much more than the universe of the welfare state. That's on Pandit Samrat Shiromani Aflatun Mahamarg. She'd continued to look blank. On Cathedral Road, between the Secretariat and what must be the world's largest garbage dump. Her face had cleared. Ah, the Secretariat was a splendid colonial structure before they boarded up those verandas and installed those freedom fighter statues. The Raj Atithi guest house was a 14-story building, crawling with low life. A 5-foot wall separated its compound from the world's largest garbage dump. Atop the wall stretched four rows of barbed wire, from various points of which sagged torn polythene bags of diverse colors. These contained human shits in different stages of decomposition. They had been flung, of course, at the dump and hadn't made it across the wall. They, in fact, looked pathetic, like POWs in a Hollywood movie, ensnared in a vain attempt to escape from a concentration camp. Now, I want to stop here, and then I want to go back and break down some of the choices that Upmanya Chatterjee made to make his story and the world that he was building so much more vivid so that we could sink into that world alongside Agastya and the author and then enjoy the story the way it's being told to us. We're all aware of the world around us. We've seen beautiful things, we've seen ugly things. But this world that Upmanya Chatterjee is building is the world of Agatha Sen, and it is remarkably depressing. So let's go over some of the things he's saying. So it starts with Agastya crying in his office. And when you read that, you feel that, okay, maybe Agastya is a very diligent worker and he loves to work, he's hardworking, all those things. But immediately afterwards, we are told that his office was his home. And then he's on leave, but the leave has not been sanctioned because he's leave not granted, and it's without pay. So he's not making any money, but he's on leave and he's in his office. This contradiction explains to us a little bit about Agastya's state of being. He is an IAS officer who's not doing any work, he's not getting any paid. And then some of the choices in the names. He was living in what was called Prajapati Aflatun Welfare State Public Servants Housing Complex Transit Hostel. Long name, memorable, funny, Aflatun. You never usually hear the word Aflatun in the context of a housing complex or a building, because Aflatun is named after Plato, the Greek philosopher. His life on leave had been an OK minus. We're used to grades, A plus, B plus. This is OK minus. It was just barely breaking even. And he does mention that Agastya Sen is not getting any sex. So he's introducing the more carnal aspects of Agastya's life, the more baser aspects of Agastya's life very early on into the book. So you would expect a book about IAS officers and the bureaucracy to be a little boring, but right away you see that Agastya cares about sex and he's not getting any, at least when he's living in the country's capital. And then, out of the blue, personnel always moved like lightning when it wanted to fuck somebody's happiness. We've heard about bureaucracy being slow moving and hard to move and hard to get any action out of them. But only when they want to fuck with you, when they want to ruin your life, can you expect them to move with lightning speed. And that's what happened with Agastya Sen, which is what Upmanya Chatterjee says. Yet again, the contradiction between your expectations of what the welfare state looks like, what the bureaucracy looks like, and the word lightning makes this sentence really interesting to me. Then starts the description of the space that he's been allotted in the Western Province. The grimy, once orange, lumpy sofa was for VV to the par infinity IP visitors. We were told that the lumpy sofa that his office has right now was earlier designated for really important people. So it was a lush and fancy sofa before, and now it's in Agastya's office, and it's lost its charm. It's grimy. Its color has faded. It's no longer orange the way it was designed before, and it's lumpy. His predecessor had won it from protocol and stores after a stimulating 5-week struggle. Again, the contradiction. You're talking about a bureaucracy. You're talking about people fighting with each other, and for something as useless as a sofa. But then the use of the word stimulating makes this interesting, because you're like, how stimulating could a fight about a sofa be? And then you imagine his predecessor writing memos and following up again and again about the sofa from for protocols and stores, and finally winning it for himself in his office, and then he had to give it up for Agastya to use. Beneath the windows lay the plain wooden bench that Agastya had stolen from down the corridor. An IAS officer stealing. You'd expect them to be stealing something important, but what did Agastya actually end up stealing? He'd stolen a plain wooden bench. Contradiction. Funny. Beside the door on a desk sat a personal computer, swathed in dusty dust sheets. We all remember those computers, which used to have a cover. You had to keep the computer covered because you didn't want dust to get inside and harm and damage the computer. Agastya also has a dust sheet, and the dust sheet is actually dusty. And once again, he chooses a really long name for that computer. Ultimatum System Configuration Module 133 MHz, Intel Processor 8 MB RAM 1 GB, HDD 1.44, FDD SVGA Megachrome Monitor Skylight 99. That is how many words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 words for the name of a computer. Similar to the multiple words that he used that was given to the transit hostel where Agastya was living back in the country's capital. So again, this was an interesting choice. Really long, complicated names for something as mundane as a transit hostel or a computer. The windows of his section of veranda offered a breathtaking view of the world's largest slum, undulating for miles down to the grey fuzziness of the Arabian Sea. You'd expect something with a sea-facing view to have a nice view, and you expect it to be a nice, pricey, fancy place. And even the use of the word breathtaking implies that there'll be something beautiful that you can see once you look out of the window. But what do you actually see? You just see a huge, huge slum which goes on for miles. So then starts his beginnings of his relationship with Daya, who's another protagonist in the book. They met on a bus on Agastya's way from the country's capital to the Western Province. And it's a luxury bus, but it's luxury in only name, because the only thing that's luxurious about it is the cost. Everything else is the same. There's a back row which is designed for 6 people, but there are 8 people sitting, including Daya and Agastya. Agastya himself is wearing his farewell gift since he was leaving the transit hostel and the rehabilitation commissionariat. So that gift that he got from his employees, from his subordinates, was something that he himself had to go out and buy, because most often his subordinates would end up giving him a clock and telling him that as the time flies, you'll be able to remember us because of the clock, and he's got 8 of them. So he makes it ridiculous. Upmanya Chatterjee makes the situation ridiculous. That here's a thoughtful gift that people give out of the goodness of their heart, but in the end, that gift loses meaning because everybody thinks the same way, everybody says the same thing. So that uniformity and conformity of thought is being emphasized, by the gifts that Agastya gets. But Agastya is not one to take it lying down. He fights back and he says, no, no, no. If you want to collect money and give me a gift, let me help you buy the gift that I will like. And he ends up buying a pair of jeans which loses color, and that color rubs off on Daya's clothes. And Agastya, as he's sitting next to Daya, because he's had no sex in the country's capital, he's feeling horny and he's imagining himself having sex with Daya. And this is page number 3 of that of this novel of nearly about 350 pages. And in page 3, the protagonist Agastya starts imagining himself having sex with Daya, and he calls himself a homo because only a homo would want to have sex with people so much older than themselves, and it's all repressed sexuality coming through. So these are all vignettes and insights into the inner life of an IAS officer. You imagine an IAS officer being extremely meticulous and by the book, but then it turns out that they have rich inner lives. Agastya is one of those people who smokes dope and imagines having sex with people on buses, just like us. Like any of us, if we were on the bus and we hadn't had sex in a while, and we saw somebody cute, we might imagine ourselves having sex with them. Which is exactly what Agastya is doing as well. So it's kind of funny that way. And then once he reaches Delhi, once he reaches the western province, Daya asks him where he is going to stay, and he says Raj Atithi State Guest House. Raj Atithi itself in English stands for state guest house, state guest. Raj Atithi State Guest, and then he's staying in that house. Then he tells her which road that house is on, and he uses the very technical, politically correct name, the name that's given by the government to old colonial roads. Pandit Samrat Shiromani Aflatun Mahamarg. So again, the use of the word Aflatun in this context makes no sense, because Aflatun is a Greek name for Plato, and in reality Aflatun means somebody who's brilliant and weird and unique and stands out. But they're talking about the bureaucracy and the welfare state. Nobody stands out in the bureaucracy and the welfare state. But these are names given to those colonial roads. When again Daya has no idea what he's talking about, he tells her, oh, this is Cathedral Road near the Secretariat beside the slum, and that rings a bell. Daya immediately catches on. Oh, yeah, you mean that Secretariat which was where the statues, which was boarded up and the statues replaced by the statues of freedom fighters. So she knows what he's talking about, except he has to use the language that she speaks, because most people outside the welfare state have no idea what these names are. People just continue using the old names. And finally, the last couple of paragraphs set the context of his stay in the western province. He's now living in the Raj Atithi State Guest House, which is a 14-story building. It's topped off, the boundary wall is topped off by 4 barbed wires, and on the barbed wire are hanging bags of shit. And these bags of shit are in different stages of decomposition. It's stinking, and the entire building is full of lowlife. So he's come from a place where he had no work to do. He was on leave. He's come to the western province to get some work done, but here too his life has not changed. It's still the same shitty life. He's still in an office which is completely as terrible as it can get. And now we'll see how the story evolves in the future paragraphs and future pages, what they contain for Agatha Sen. But these paragraphs create a vivid picture of a man who is at the pinnacle of Indian government jobs. He's an IAS officer on posting to the western province, and yet what he experiences is the absolute dregs of existence. Terrible housing, no sex, colleagues who give him the same gifts and have the same terrible, banal things to say to him. He is not enjoying it, but he has to continue, and that's where the story is going to go, I think. But this chapter and these paragraphs were a fantastic example of scene creation and world building that I think Upmanya Chatterjee excels in, and I'll have to read through the rest of the story to figure out how, if the quality of writing continues and it continues, and the jokes are similar to this. But this was an early look into what world building could look like from an Indian perspective. You talk about the things that are true about us, that India is the way it is, and not try to make India sound different from the way it is. And that honesty is what Upmanya Chatterjee excels in his books. So I hope this first dive into the technique of writing and language hacking can be of use to people. So let's go over once more what Upmanya Chatterjee did. He used extremely high flying language like placidly, snugly, then stimulating 5 week struggle, okay minus. Use language like that to show how mundane Agastya's current existence actually was. Then he introduced ideas like repressed homosexuality and the frustrations of working with people who are not as smart as you, I guess you could say. Those frustrations will come through, and they're already being hinted at by this story. So I think these are some things we can all carry forward when we are writing our own stories. That let's find ways to make our story engaging and interesting by using language which makes paints a very vivid picture of the world we try to build. So this is the end of the episode. Hope it helps, and we can always discuss it in comments. Thanks so much.